Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast with host Britney Spears. Settle in and lock your doors as we crawl into the dark corners of true crime. In TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 104 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, if you haven't yet, please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, or follow wherever you get your podcasts for the newest episodes every Monday. And this is one of the best ways to support the podcast for others to find us and join us each week. Next, the Hidden Files bonus podcast will be back, but for now, if you're interested in checking out the type of podcast it is, you can find a few episodes on here, the main channel, or check out a few on Patreon. If you haven't seen the podcast website, I would say check it out. TheKillFile.com is where you can learn a little bit more about how the podcast got started if you're interested. You can fill out a listener files form about your own true crime story, and while you're there, if you have a case that you want me to check out or cover, send it over. Also, it may take me a moment, but I usually end up seeing the social media comments as well if you suggested a case there, but if you want to make sure that I see it and add it to the list, then use the website form. While you are there on the website, you can also find the merch shop, where we add new items all of the time. The current summer tank tops are my personal favorite right now. They're funny, and they sport the KillFile logo on the back to let others know to find us. If you haven't seen any of the funny slogans yet, you should give them a look. Maybe you'll find something for a loved one's birthday who loves true crime. If you can, please share the podcast with anyone in your own life who you find out loves true crime like us. People who don't listen to podcasts, they don't really know what they're missing out on when it makes everyday tasks less mundane. And instead of spacing out on your drive to work, you can learn about a fucked up case and you can mull it over all day. Finally, take a moment to follow us on social media. We are on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and of course YouTube. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to dive into an infamous female killer from the UK whose name is Joanne Dennehy. By nature, it is more probable than not that a serial killer will in fact be a man. Statistically, men represent between 85 and 90% of all serial killers. Radford University's serial killer database, which, by the way, has cases in it that actually date back to the early 1900s, would show the differences between traditional men and women serial killers. Not to say that non-binary or non-gender specific people aren't capable of being serial killers as well. My guess is since we didn't acknowledge this much before recent years, they are just reported simply as men or women. So, when it came to this case, I went down a little rabbit hole on serial killer statistics I personally found interesting and thought that I would share a little of what I learned, as you too may find it fascinating. According to said database, while men are about 6 times more likely to kill complete strangers, women, on the other hand, are twice as likely to actually kill people they know, whether it be friends, acquaintances, family members, spouses, or even patients that they're responsible for if they're some sort of medical field position. Think about that for a second. How many datelines have we seen where it's a fucking husband? Am I right? But maybe those are just killers, not necessarily serial killers, which makes me wonder, why would women be more likely to target people they know? It is said only about 4% of women actually stalk their targets before ultimately killing them, while a whopping 65% of men stalk theirs. Meaning that guy that you keep seeing drive by your house or running to at the store looking at you strangely? Yeah, that may not be a coincidence. Carry mace, a knife, and a taser on you at all times like I do. I don't fuck around, and you shouldn't either. Men are said to be the more aggressive ones when it comes to violence. They usually choose a method of murder which would see them up close and personal with their victims, and can often include acts of brutality. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to kill in less confrontational methods like poisoning or even suffocation, which we could probably all guess, knowing that poison is usually seen as a woman's choice of weapon. Have you guys heard of aqua tofana? Maybe I will cover that one day. It's a good story. So what about motivation? What drives serial killers, or what are the differences in motives between men and women? Well, what drives serial killers is always the fascinating question, right? What makes people do the things that they do? which we see as outside of social norms. But when it comes to motivational differences between gender roles, well, these can be seen after gathering information that's rather interesting. See, men sometimes have a large motive in their desire for power and control. Sometimes it's sexual or a quote-unquote unfulfilled hunger that they're wanting to satiate, while women have a more quote-unquote pragmatic motive, or rather logically, sensible, realistic, or even to solve a problem like financial problems or even revenge. Is revenge logical or sensible? My opinion is probably not, unless you know some fucker killed your child, then in my opinion, revenge is absolutely on point, and you should be allowed in all 50 states, just saying. But just regular revenge over cheating or money or whatever, then murder is not logical or sensible, right? However, one thing I found fascinating and funny when it comes to the differences in men and women serial killers is that women are more likely to get away with their murders for much longer than men. Now, is that because of their choice of committing more quieter killings? Probably, but I would like to think that it's because, for as often as women are looked at as emotional and acting of those emotions, it seems to me that women are able to keep their shit together more than men who are caught killing people out of anger, rage, sexual notations, or whatever, while women may be smart enough to hold on to that seething anger and carry out their plot logically enough to not get caught for at least some time. While women are said to have an average active criminal career of 8 to 11 years, men's are only 2 years. So, what makes a woman who is seen as the outlier of these statistics a brutal and violent killer? On March 19th in 2013 in Peterborough, sorry if I butchered that, England, lived a Polish immigrant named Lucas Slabazewski, who had just gotten a message from a presumed lady friend named Joanne Dennehy, asking him to come over to her place. Lucas had immigrated to England back in 2005, and after meeting Joanne at some point was in good spirits about having a quote-unquote girlfriend like her in his life. After the pair had been hanging out and having a few drinks, one source would say that Dennehy convinced Lucas to place a blindfold over his eyes as some sort of game they were going to play, trusting his possible romantic interest. Lucas did as she asked, probably thinking nothing of it. Unfortunately for Lucas, this is when Dennehy would pull out a large knife and attack her victim with one stab going through his heart, killing him. After Dennehy had committed the murder, she may have known that she wouldn't be able to move, let alone dispose of a body on her own, where it was presumed that she called a good friend / another possible love interest named Gary Stretch. Now, the fact that this guy's name was Stretch to me is fucking hilarious because the dude is 7'7" tall. Yeah, seriously, and that's his last name. It's Stretch. It's fantastic. Anyways, Stretch would show up with a friend of theirs named Leslie Layton, and together the group, unsure of how to get rid of the body, decided the best course of action for now would be to put the body of Lucas in one of those rolling trash cans that most of us have over here, but over there they call them wheelie bins. It was also known that not long after the murder, Dennehy had asked a girl whom she was said to be friends with, that was just 14 years old, over to show the body of Lucas in the trash bin. It was found within 2 days of the murder. Dennehy and Stretch bought a car for the purpose of finding a good place to dump the victim's body, which would end up being in a more remote location in a ditch. In fact, there's a short episode about this case on a show called Manhunt, and on it they show where the bodies are found. So let's talk for a minute about Joanne Dennehy, because as previously mentioned before, many statistics will show that it's more likely when a woman kills that it's for some purpose, like financial gain, and not normally for the pleasure of it. However, we will learn here that this is not the case for Dennehy. Joanne Christine Dennehy was born on August 15th, 1982, in a place called St. Albans, Hertfordshire, to parents Kathleen and Kevin Dennehy. This is going to be one of those cases that leaves us all wondering how Dennehy ended up the way that she did when she came from such a loving and reportedly supporting home. Her parents were said to be nothing short of caring, and Dennehy was said to have grown up in a regular home with her sister Maria and another sibling. Her father Kevin was a security guard, and her mother Kathleen managed a retail store. When Dennehy was growing up, there seemed to be no outward signs that she would turn out to be the monster she later became, as she was described as having a seemingly normal childhood. Dennehy liked to dress up in her mother's clothes as a young girl, do her hair and her makeup for fun, as their parents doted on both girls, and the family lived a basic and stable life. Later on, Dennehy would claim to have been abused as a child, although I'm not sure in what capacity, as I couldn't find any details on the claim. It has widely come out that there has never been any evidence of abuse when she was little, but we won't really know for sure. Dennehy was said to be a smart girl who went to an excellent secondary school where she would excel in writing and by all accounts was a bright and intelligent young lady. In the beginning of her teenage years, she would do little things as most of us may have, like met some people at a park to try some alcohol or smoke, although I will say she seemed to do this at a younger age than some of us might have. It was around the age of 14 that Dennehy's life started to take a turn for the worst, as she was starting to get into darker things, when she was said to have met a group of what they called fairground workers, which if I understand correctly are like carnival workers or showmen. Now, this group would have allegedly been the ones who supplied her with alcohol and now introduced her to some of the harder drugs that Dennehy would get into. This, in my opinion, could be a larger reason that she ended up the way she did, right? Because I feel like drugs just hit some people's lives hard, and maybe in ways that we don't even understand. Some sources would say that this is also the time where Dennehy started to talk back to her parents, her teachers, and create problems in the classroom, while also showing bullying-type behavior. One source even said that there were reports of her torturing small animals, although I didn't see that anywhere else. It was said around this time is when Dennehy started to run away from home. Maybe not wanting to live under her parents' rules anymore, she seemed to yearn for freedom in doing whatever she wanted. She ran away a total of 8 different times, but each and every time she would be found and brought back home. When Dennehy was 15 years old, she met her boyfriend, John Traynor, who at the time was 21. Yeah. Craving the freedom that she was, Dennehy decided to move in with her boyfriend, John, instead of living at home any longer, and by the time she was just 17 years old, she would give birth to the couple's first child. Sources would talk to the fact that although Dennehy was a mother now, she didn't seem to do very motherly type duties when it came to her home, meaning she didn't really cook or clean, and was only stable for a short time. Some would say that she seemed to almost resent having to be tied down to her home and take care of her child. A few years later, Dennehy would have her second child. John, when later interviewed, said that their relationship started off as normal, and although she was tough, she wasn't really violent, but she could rip you to pieces with her words, which, same. I always go for the jugular, not my finest quality. And as I get older, I find myself doing it less. Maybe it was just like a defense thing, like I'm gonna hurt you and gut you before you have a chance to hurt me. Dennehy was also said to be extremely manipulative, especially, it seems, with men, and wasn't exactly satisfied with a more normal life being a mother and a girlfriend. Dennehy, although she had already had at least one of her children, would leave the house for periods of time, and when she finally would come home, she was wasted or high, and often just disgusting. There was one particular incident where she was completely fucked up when she came home, and when John was upset about her being home this way, maybe in front of the kids or whatever, she grabbed a knife in front of both of her children, and she stabbed it into the floor. John would state that once she had had enough outdoing whatever she was outdoing and returned, she would eat and shower and be around them for a little while, but once again she would get bored and she took off. That must have been so sad for her daughters. That breaks my heart for them, because not knowing when the person who is usually a young child's whole world will be back again is so unstable and maybe feels like abandonment over and over. Dennehy basically used her partner as a free babysitter so she could just go out and party and not have to take care of her babies. So oftentimes, John raised the little girls on his own. This is around the time that Dennehy again spiraled further. Although John never knew exactly what the mother of his children was doing when she was gone for the long periods of time, he would say during an interview with ITV News that he heard talks about possible stints in a psych ward, some violence, and maybe even some prison time. John would describe some different behaviors that were detrimental to his children, like Dennehy showing up at his daughter's school with a backpack full of alcohol, drunk, causing problems with the school, which is just so embarrassing for those little girls. On another occasion, he had found the girls with their mother on some particular road, and she was only wearing her bra, no shirt, allegedly showing her girls how to throw rocks at cars. Yeah, what the fuck is that? John would claim that the final incident for him was when Dennehy showed up at home with blood up and down her arms and legs. That was it for him. He was done. He decided to raise the girls on his own from that point forward and stated that he would just receive the occasional letters from the unstable woman after that. Now, later on, after Dennehy's crimes, a Mr. Farnham would assess her as, in his opinion, not only having extreme emotional instability, but also possibly having ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, aka psychopathy. But he also felt that she had paraphilia sadomasochism, wanting to inflict pain onto others for reasons of sexual gratification. He would further note her lack of empathy and pathological lying. In one source, it was stated they believed that she also suffered from borderline personality disorder, while Dr. Farnham also noted that Dennehy had what he called a superficial charm, which seemed to be part of how she was able to easily manipulate people. On one of the videos that I watched of her being booked in, she's not only flirting with almost every person that she comes in contact with, but she would also compliment them and charm the pants right off the officers and staff that was booking her. It was nuts. Just 10 days after murdering her first victim, Lucas, Dennehy would commit 2 more heinous crimes. Dennehy at the time was living with a roommate named John Chapman, whose neighbor later was interviewed on Manhunt, a woman named Michelle Bowles. She would describe him as a sweet man. Michelle would talk about when they were living in the apartment complex that there was this real sense of community there. People would hang around with each other and drink tea, and they were very friendly with each other. John Chapman had lost his wife, and after his loss, he started coming around the community and partying with them a little more. It was known that Chapman had a bit of a drinking problem, but nonetheless, he was harmless, and he was a man who had served in the Royal Navy, and at the time of his murder, he was 56 years old. For reasons unknown, Dennehy would stab John to death in his own room on or about March 29th, which happened to be Good Friday. Later on, Dennehy would claim to a man forced to be an accomplice to later crimes, and to a neighbor named Georgina that she quote-unquote had to kill him because he was being a pervert and watching her in the bath. On the episode of Manhunt and in the court documents, Dennehy tried to claim that she had allegedly seen Chapman watching her while she was in the bathtub that day, and she felt the need to take his life over it. First off, there is absolutely no evidence that Chapman was anything other than a kindly, drunken man, and later evidence would show that he was stabbed to death on his own mattress, which authorities would later find in the backyard. So, if he had been watching her in the bath, and she felt like she needed to kill him, then why wasn't he stabbed in the bathroom, or the hallway, or leading to his room? Why would he have been killed on his own bed? Authorities believed none of her story about Chapman being a pervert were true, but rather once Dennehy had a taste for blood, she wanted to do it again, so she up and attacked her roommate while he was drunk one day and asleep on his bed. Neighbor Michelle Bowles got choked up when talking about Chapman, saying that he was a good man and that he did not deserve what happened to him. Chapman was stabbed 5 times in the chest, 2 of those piercing his heart and once in the neck, severing his carotid artery. There was determined to be no defensive wounds on John, as if he was possibly unable to defend himself, which helped with the theory that he was drunkenly passed out or asleep. It also later came out that Chapman was afraid of Dennehy and afraid for his life. In fact, I guess his roommate was making his life a living hell, and he had told others that he was afraid she would do something to him. I'm sorry, but the excuse of a man spying on you in the bathroom while you were in the bath, even if that had been true, and again, I don't think it was, but even if it were that, is that worth losing your life over? I mean, why wouldn't you just call the cops and then move out? Why wouldn't you just leave or call a friend to come over and stay with you until you could move? It doesn't make any sense to kill someone over that. According to court documents, John Chapman had approximately 4 times the legal limit of alcohol in his body, and the aforementioned accomplice to murder after the fact, Leslie Layton, had an actual photo of Chapman's deceased body on her cell phone taken at 7:30 a.m. that she had tried to delete, but of course, it was retrieved. There was also a thought that possibly Dennehy had taken the photo and then at some point erased it because Leslie denied ever knowing about the picture. But I don't think it's a big stretch to think that she could have taken that picture. I mean, she did help dispose of the first victim's body. It was thought by the authorities and judge that after Dennehy killed Chapman, that she used his phone to call her quote-unquote boyfriend Stretch to come and help her, and the trio then dumped Chapman's body later that evening under the guise of dark. The next victim came on the heels of Chapman at just the very next day, a Mr. Kevin Lee, who was at the time Dennehy and Chapman's landlord. Lee was said to be a father and a husband who unfortunately became infatuated by Dennehy and fell under her spell. Court documents would make it known that Lee was under the assumption that Dennehy had been horrifically abused as a child and that in turn she had killed her own father and spent time in prison for the murder, none of which was actually true. This is, however, the reason why Lee wanted to help her. Lee was employing Dennehy at the time, giving her the opportunity to work at his leasing company. It was said that she was doing some sort of enforcing job, if you will. Like Lee would ask her to go and seek out the people who were late or had not paid their rent and get them to pay. Dennehy allegedly had confided in Lee that she had actually killed her first victim, Lucas. And the thought was that maybe Dennehy regretted this or was afraid that she had told him, so she may have felt the need to get rid of him because he knew too much. And he allegedly had seen one of the bodies as well. Dennehy lured Lee to her apartment under the guise of sex, where Lee later told a friend that her plan was to dress him up and quote-unquote rape him. This was an agreed-upon sexual exchange that was to take place that Lee had told his friend Dave about in what seemed like excitement just an hour before he would be murdered. Kevin Lee was also stabbed to death with 5 stabs to his chest that sadly pierced his heart and both lungs. But with this victim, there were defensive wounds suggesting that Lee tried to fight his killer off. Again, Stretch and Leslie helped to dispose of the body and clean up the scene. When the bodies of Kevin Lee and John Chapman were found together, it was said that Lee was found wearing a black sequined dress with his butt exposed. It was not known if this was simply how he had been dumped, and no one really cared, or if this was on purpose to humiliate the deceased man, but either way, shocking for the farmer who had found them one day. With the authorities able to link Joanne Dennehy to the murders as they were investigating things, it was being put together, and now they were on the lookout for Joanne and Stretch, who had been seen together. Now, this is where the final stretch of the 10-day murder spree would take place, and where the last person in this fucked up story would come in. On the episode of Manhunt, a man was interviewed named Mark Lloyd, who was basically lured to help Dennehy and Stretch and then was forced as an accomplice. Mark would describe how he had met Gary Stretch in prison and that, yeah, he had committed things like robbery and other non-violent crimes, but said that Stretch was basically a gentle giant, and he had not known him to ever do anything malicious to harm another human being. So when Mark had seen that Dennehy and Stretch were wanted for at least one murder, he was almost in disbelief. The authorities had started something called Operation Darcy, where they used the media to help them find both Joanne Dennehy and Gary Stretch for the murders. Not long after they were piecing things together, they would also get a report and some CCTV footage showing Dennehy and Stretch going into a gas station, holding hands, and then they took a bunch of stuff and left without paying. When Mark received the phone call from Stretch asking Mark to come over and help them offload some merchandise they had, Mark of course went. I mean, this was his friend, not knowing what was about to take place. When he got to wherever they met, maybe a motel, Mark would talk about the fact that Dennehy answered the door and that she smelled really bad, saying that he could tell that the two had been living rough for a while. Mark would say something about asking Gary if he really had committed the murders that they were wanted for, and this is when Dennehy would say that Stretch was just the taxi driver, but she herself was the killer. Mark said they showed him the merch, saying that they needed help getting rid of it, and Mark was good at that type of stuff. He started making phone calls and ended up with one guy telling him he would buy the entire lot from them, consisting of TVs and other electronics, and the loot was about $3,000 or $4,000. Mark would state that he could tell that Stretch was in some sort of trouble here, like maybe the vibes were just off, and that it seemed like Dennehy was the one running the show. There also came a point where Stretch would show Mark that he was carrying a gun in his waistband. Mark knew the situation was not great and dangerous, as Dennehy had already said that she was the one who had killed the people, and with Stretch being under her spell, seemingly head over heels for his quote-unquote girlfriend, Mark was nervous for his own safety and wanted to get the hell out of there. Or at least that's what he claimed. Now, I have to say that the guy Mark seems like a genuine guy, not like a bad man either. Like, yeah, maybe he has committed some petty crimes or sketchy stuff, but he definitely didn't give off like monster vibes, and there seemed to be some credibility to his claims. For example, after offloading the goods and getting the money, the trio stopped at a gas station. Now, Mark went inside saying that he wanted to alert someone, like tell the shop owner to call the cops, and that he was with the two that were being looked for after he realized that it was Dennehy that had actually killed the people. But as he went into the gas station, he wasn't alone. Mark said Dennehy didn't trust him at all, and she was like 2 steps behind him, and there is footage of this. While he was standing at the counter to buy whatever, Dennehy was standing close to him, looking like she was kind of hugging him from behind, but as Mark states it, she was actually holding the knife to his back, maybe just as a reminder that she was still in charge, and that he better not do anything stupid. And in the video of them standing at the counter, you can actually see her poke into his back while she kind of hugs him from behind. I couldn't actually see the knife because they had like dark clothes or jackets on or whatever, but I definitely saw a motion from her that looked like she could have been poking him as a reminder. In the video, Dennehy was flirting with the lady cashier, telling her that she had a nice body, and asked her to do a little spin, maybe throwing her off as to anything being wrong, and still taking control of any situation. Mark legit seemed afraid of her, and during one picture that was taken while they were on the road, because apparently they insisted, Mark was flipping off the camera or whatever, but not exactly smiling, as he stated that during this picture, Stretch was actually holding him in his seat. Let me explain further. As the three were driving around, Dennehy started saying that she wanted to kill some people and told Stretch to drive towards Hereford. Hereford? Sorry. Now, after the gas station theft incident, the authorities were now aware of the type of car that Dennehy and Stretch were in and could watch further cameras, seeing in which direction the two, but now 3, including Mark, were headed. Mark would talk about how afraid he was of Dennehy, and now he was afraid for others, as she was clearly extremely angry and was stating how she wanted to kill someone. She said she wanted to find a victim that was not a woman or child, but rather a man with a dog, which is very weird because the father of her children was out walking with his dog when he actually met her for the first time. On another little video about the case on Deadly True Crime, one of the criminologists said usually with serial killers, they are often trying to reenact something from their childhood or their past and give it a different outcome, which I actually thought was fucking fascinating. Like, yeah, we see that a lot. But I didn't actually think about the fact that they were trying to create a different outcome. That's fascinating. Anyways, they didn't really see that in Dennehy's case, but rather that she may be killed for the thrill or the rush or whatever. But I couldn't help wonder if she was sort of reenacting something maybe with her ex, John, because she was adamant about it being a man and a man out walking his dog. Weird. Anyways, according to the testimony and court documents, it was Stretch who actually saw the first victim of the day's attacks, a Mr. Robin Bereza. Bereza was a 63-year-old man who at the time was out walking his dog instead of jogging, as he usually did. I guess he was a retired firefighter, and he made an effort to stay healthy. The judge seemed rather pissed off that Stretch gave Dennehy the opportunity to victimize this man, which agreed, that's pretty fucked up, dude. The judge further talked to the fact that Dennehy claimed to be under the influence of alcohol. Not that it's an excuse, but just a factor. However, the judge was not fooled by this being a mitigating factor, and he did not believe that she was so drunk that she didn't know what she was doing. He felt this was inaccurate, although it would be a part of her defense, because only a few minutes before she attacked Mr. Bereza, they had been at the gas station where the security footage showed that she didn't seem impaired. As Dennehy ran up behind her victim, he had no idea what was about to happen to him, as she started to stab him in the back and the upper arm. Her attack on the poor man was so vicious and violent that she actually broke one of his bones while attacking him with the knife. It was said that as the unsuspecting older man turned to see what was happening to him, that Dennehy said something to the tune of wanting to hurt and fucking kill him. Mr. Bereza tried to fight off his attacker with kicks and tried to run, where she chased after him, but then stopped, possibly because another car had pulled up, trying to turn on a street nearby. During this attack, it was alleged that Stretch just drove the car slowly behind Dennehy, attacking the poor innocent man, and that this was around the moment where Mark tried to run from the car. He would state in his interview that he had said something about, "I didn't sign up for this," and he tried to get out, and that's when Stretch grabbed him and held him, telling Mark that this is just what she does. I'm sorry, that's just what she does? Fuck that, man. I'm getting the fuck out of here. What the hell? I know Mark couldn't really run because Stretch had a gun and Mark was fearing for his life, but I totally get it. I would have fled so fucking fast. One thing that is mentioned in this case as something that is missing is sort of the escalation that we usually see when it comes to serial killers. There's usually different levels or obstacles of smaller crimes that usually take place before a killer is brave enough or doesn't care anymore, or can't soothe the quote-unquote itch to kill someone. That didn't seem to happen here with Dennehy. Her ex even said he didn't understand how she went from partying and drugs to just killing people for no apparent reason. Thankfully, although Dennehy got 2 horrific and possibly fatal stabs into Mr. Breza, he would go on to live because he was able to get medical treatment quickly. The judge further spoke about how the poor man had a hemopneumothorax, which is when air and blood can collect in the hollow space between the chest wall and the lungs. He also had a fractured rib, which I can only imagine is extremely painful as well. After Dennehy attacked Mr. Breza, she jumped back into the car, at which point Mark assumed that the man was dead and was seemingly horrified, while the killer sat there asking Stretch to find her another victim. Yep, she wanted to do it again. About 2 miles from where the first victim was attacked, a man named John Roger, a 56-year-old man, was also out, simply walking his dog. This attack, while just as horrific and traumatizing as the first, seemed to be more vicious and more violent. As Dennehy approached Roger, she immediately started stabbing him, and as the man turned around, she continued to stab him, pushing him backward as she was continuing her attack, and this is when the man would fall. When Mark recanted the incident, he would use the word frenzy to describe her actions. The judge retold the story, saying as Roger fell to the ground, Dennehy did not stop. In fact, she just kept going, kept stabbing, and when the victim pleaded with her to stop, she said something about how the man was bleeding and how she needed to do it some more. The stabs to this poor man not only lacerated his bowels, but also his kidneys. And to top off the attack, Dennehy stole the victim's dog, said to be just covered in blood and was shaking, probably scared to death. Dennehy had stabbed John Roger more than 30 times. This is about the time that Mark could hear sirens just all around them, and he knew the authorities were closing in and everyone was about to be caught. As the authorities came upon the vehicle with Dennehy, Stretch, Mark, and the dog Archie, they probably weren't sure how this was going to go down, seeing that this woman had already killed a few people and attacked 2 more, while still armed with the knife she used. However, reportedly, Dennehy went peacefully and didn't make a huge fuss over it, which led authorities and other people to believe that this is how she wanted to make her mark on the world, like she knew she would be caught, and that was fine. But maybe she wanted to make sure she would be remembered? Who knows? So as she was brought into booking, and I tried to find the audio for you guys, but I couldn't. However, there are videos all over the internet showing how she was acting towards the authorities who brought her in. She was just so blatantly flirting with anyone there she could, talking to them like she was a completely normal person. And she actually said the words, "It could be worse." When she asked what she was being charged with, they told her murder and attempted murder. She said that was nothing and that it could be worse. After complimenting the officer standing there with her, she said something like, "Not bad for a murderer, right?" She then said she wasn't suicidal, she was cheery. It was just wild and bizarre and confusing. You should check it out. People on the episode of Mindhunter said she didn't seem to feel any remorse, that she had literally just traumatized people from her attacks, and thankfully both of the men survived, but she didn't know that at the time, right? And I'm guessing it wasn't her intention to leave them alive. The authorities had evidence against her after interviewing Mark and Stretch, as well as testing the knife for DNA. There was nowhere to hide, really, for this monster. As she was being interviewed, she continued to just say no comment over and over to their questions. And as Stretch was being interviewed, he tried to minimize his involvement as much as he could. However, there was no denying the fact that he drove Dennehy around and even helped her find her victims, as well as aided in the after-the-fact for the murders. Mark would later say that he didn't think Dennehy had any love interest in Stretch whatsoever, but rather, had she been able to drive herself, that she would have had no use for Stretch at all. Dennehy seemed to use people and didn't really have any remorse for it. People were expendable to her, as she clearly showed no empathy for the crimes that she had just committed. While trial was being prepared for Joanne Dennehy for the murders of her 3 victims and the attempted murders of the other 2, people were still left wondering what the motives were for killing and attacking the people she did. There really wasn't any other reason that the authorities could see except for the fact that she may have liked the thrill of killing and she wanted notoriety. Gary Stretch pleaded not guilty, but he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 19 years to be served. As Dennehy entered the courtroom ready to make her plea, she shocked the shit out of every person in that room when she pled guilty right there on the spot. Everyone expected her to claim, even her own lawyers expected her to claim not guilty, where they would then go through the trial process. Experts and authorities alike feel that this could have been her final act of control, final act of getting whatever she wanted, and maybe her last chance at the wow factor for people to remember her. The judge would sentence Joanne Dennehy to a whole life term, meaning there is no possibility for her to get out of prison, in February of 2014, because she is believed to be so damn dangerous and shows absolutely no remorse for her actions. She is only one of 4 women in the UK to receive this sentence. If you were wondering if she was a better person now that she was in prison, it was said that she was not. In fact, she immediately threatened to kill Rose West, which, okay, I think that's one person the world could do without, but still. It got to the point where they had to move Rose West to another prison before Dennehy could get her hands on her. There was also said to be plans of an escape found in Dennehy's diary that spoke of her either hurting or killing a prison guard to get out, and then chopping off one of the guards' fingers to be able to use it on the biometric system to free herself. Yeah. Between September 2013 and September 2015, she was placed in solitary confinement because of the escape plan, and some sources believe that had they put her in Gen Pop, she would have killed other inmates at the time. In 2018, Dennehy and another inmate, Haley, who was 36, had fallen in love, and Dennehy proposed to her girlfriend. The two wanted to get married. Haley's sister, in an article in the New York Post, told the authorities that if they allow the two to get married, then the blood of her sister would be on their hands, as they feared for their sister's life if she marries the serial killer. Apparently, the two women had also already had a suicide pact that failed, although both women were said to be severely injured and had to be put in the hospital. Joanne Dennehy is currently still alive and serving her whole life sentence at a high-security prison in County Durham, England, called HMP Low Newton. And that, my friends, is the story of spree killer or serial killer Joanne Christine Dennehy. Narcissist, thrill killer, and all-around shitbag. People seem to be really taken by this case because of the aspect that she is a woman, not a man, and was somebody who actually enjoyed taking the lives and hurting other people. That level of violence or brutality isn't seen by women as often, and I think people just could not wrap their heads around the fact that she was just so blatantly attacking random people and then walked into the police station like nothing had happened, charming everyone. If you get a chance to look up that video, it definitely gives you an insight to the type of person that she is, and you can see why it would be easy for people to fall under her spell or whatever, if she makes them feel some type of way, and that's special. I truly felt bad for the Mark guy who was forced to stay in the car and watch everything unfold. He didn't seem to want to be involved in any of it, and he genuinely seemed kind of traumatized after going through what he did. I hope for his sake that he got his shit together after that. I'm curious how you guys feel, though, about the fact that Stretch got a minimum of 19 years in prison before he would be eligible for parole. How do we feel about that? On the one hand, I'm like, yeah, that's fair, because he didn't kill anyone, right? But on the other hand, I'm like, dude, he was so in love with this crazy woman enough to help her dispose of bodies and drive her around to find people to kill. Like, what the fuck? Who does that? I also remember reading that Stretch had sent her a love letter after the two had been caught, confessing his love for her still, and saying something about his biggest regret was that he was not able to sleep with her as he had wanted to and still wanted to. That right there was like, dude, she was straight up using you as an actual taxi driver and had no interest in you, and that's exactly what Mark was saying too. This guy wasted his life for a woman who could give two shits about him or the fact that she is in prison for the rest of her life for what she did. She simply doesn't care. And those types of people scare me the most. The ones who don't give two shits about the consequences. I hope the victims' families were able to at least get the smallest bit of closure knowing this wicked woman will never see the light of day, bearing she does not escape. And I wish nothing but the best for those affected by this lady's random acts of violence. It's sick. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about the case as much as I did, and remember to keep a vigilant eye out when you're doing even the most basic things like walking with your dog. You never know what could be lurking around the corner, unfortunately. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to today's episode here on The Kill File. Check out the website at TheKillFile.com to suggest a case or find the merch shop. Follow us on social media for weekly reminders about episodes, to share your thoughts, or to find bonus pictures from the cases. Remember to lock your doors, lock your windows, and stay safe. See you next Monday for another story here on The Kill File.